what I appreciated is that you spent quite a bit of time with a chapter in Joni's career that maybe a lot of people don't want to talk about, don't want to think about, question mark. I'll give the context here, which is that Joni started experimenting with jazz in the 70s. She was really influenced by Bitches Brew, the Miles Davis record. But this is where maybe the most disturbing part of Joni's career starts to surface. I know you struggle to write about Art Nouveau. Can you explain who Art is?
Art is Joni's muse and self-created inner self, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's a weird way to say it. But basically, she long had said she lived for her art and art was her companion. Well, Joni loves wordplay, and eventually art with a small a becomes art, a person.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how it happened. In the mid-70s, Leland Sklar, the bass player, was having a Halloween party, and Joni didn't have a costume. So she was walking down the road in Hollywood, I think Hollywood Boulevard maybe, and walks by a man who kind of, gives her a like, hey, sister, you looking good thing. And he's a black man. And she claimed to have felt his spirit kind of enter her, or she felt inspired by him.
Mm-hmm.
Went into a costume shop, figured I'm going to dress like this man. And that included brown makeup that she applied to her face.
Yeah.
So she bought an Afro wig, she bought a fedora, and I've been saying she looked like the kind of a black man who was on the cover of Miles Davis's album On the Corner. Let's just say someone who would be hanging out on the corner in the mid 70s. And the legend, which I find completely unbelievable, is that no one at this party recognized her.
Right.
She was so convincing in this costume. That's how she told it. Okay, one costume, that's still a terrible error, and there is a photograph documenting it. However, she didn't leave it at that. She was so delighted in her charade that she then donned the costume again for the cover of her album, Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, on which she also, by the way, appears on the back cover with her head superimposed on the body of a First Nations person in full regalia. So she's definitely playing with fire, the fire of identity here.
Yeah.
Art Nouveau appears again briefly in the concert film Shadows and Light, and then in a short film she made called The Black Cat with the White Mouse. I always get this wrong. Anyway, it's the cat with the white mouse socks, and you can find it on YouTube. So she keeps this figure alive.
Right.
No one around her questions her. Very few critics even question her. And although Art Nouveau's costume is retired, she continued to talk about her connection with black men, how she was somehow inhabited.
Like partly spiritually, yes.
Yes. Yeah. And even going so far as to say in a much later interview that a dentist had told her she had the teeth of a black man. So she, this is something that people have confronted, but usually just say, oh, it was the times, many people were doing this. In my chapter, I just try to say, we need to face this head on and face the fact that our heroes, and someone who actually collaborated with many black musicians, was, quite a champion of making music across racial and every line, that she felt she could do this.
I mean, I was going to say, like, Joni has sort of traditionally had, like, in terms of the collaborators that she has in terms of her band, she has so many black musicians that she's worked with for such a long time. She's deeply close friends with Herbie Hancock. I mean, like, the story of how black artists have influenced Joni's life, like, that's not a secret at all. But then you kind of get to this chapter, and it's a chapter that I think maybe because of the discomfort, people would like to, skip over or like acknowledge, but then kind of move on quickly from it. But you sort of talked about how difficult and strange this chapter was to write for, as you were sort of trying to work through this. You spoke with a professor named Miles Greer about facing this part of her history. What did he say that helped you write this chapter?
Well, I had read a piece that Miles had written years before. He was the first scholar who alerted me to this because, it's amazing, Ellen. I mean, people don't know about this chapter in her life.
I didn't until I read your book.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It's so wild. I mean, it was right there in plain sight, and yet people don't know. So I saw Miles present this paper, which you can find online, and his thoughts on both her motivations and how that sits in the world were really definitive. And I didn't want to just paraphrase him. I wanted to try to have a dialogue. And when we spoke, one thing I said was, hey, look, I'm trying to check my own white privilege. And, I recognize even this conversation is, in a sense, me, risking airing my white privilege again. So he kept pulling me back from that. And I mean, one important point that he makes is, well, two important points he makes. One, and other scholars have made this point too, but is that Joni was kind of showing up her white male companions and saying, look, you're putting me in the position, a marginalized position similar to Black men, but also, I mean, this is an interesting way to think about it. Also, I'm feeling objectified. I'm feeling like I kind of have to pimp myself, as it were, to really be realized as an artist. And by inhabiting this costume, I'm showing that in a really almost like cartoonish way. So that's one thing. But another thing that Miles said that I think is so important is that really what matters isn't this symbolic transgression. That does matter, and we have to talk about it. But ultimately, he wanted me to think about who is doing material work and helping people materially. Who is actually uplifting Black collaborators in that space. And he says Joni was.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Bonnie Raitt, who supported people like Ruth Brown. Let's talk about some of these other artists who were really in there and making sure that the economics were fair. So I just wanted to have this dialogue, both to not foreground my voice, but to show that we can only move forward in dialogue across these lines, and also just because he has such great insights.